be around 16 degrees Celsius at this time of the year. Much cooler underneath the cloud and rain across Scotland, with northerly winds coming down across the Northern Isles as well. The rain will continue throughout Saturday evening and overnight. Again, could be some heavy pulses at times, but much of the rest of the UK will stay dry once again. Some cloud pushing into eastern coastal areas, so will turn quite murky here overnight, and a few fog patches developing across southern areas of England and Wales, but a mild night for most of us, around 12-14 degrees Celsius. The rain across Scotland will gradually travel its way northwards throughout Sunday, pushing across the Highlands, Aberdeenshire and then into the Northern Isles later on. Will turn drier then for central southern areas of Scotland, and again for Northern Ireland, Wales and England. A largely dry day with the cloud in the east stubbornly clearing, with some brighter spells developing later on in the morning. Temperatures again climbing up to 24 degrees Celsius, but a bit milder now for Scotland as well. Bye-bye.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to GB News Saturday. It's just gone midday. I'm Emily Carver, and for the next 3 hours, I'll be keeping you company on your TV, online and digital radio. So coming up, we are at war. Those are the words of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as fighters from the military group Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israel. We'll bring you the very latest as it happens. Then Nigel Farage and Tice are expected to speak at 12:30 at the Reform UK Party conference in London. We'll be going there live, so stay tuned for that. And with the smoking ban and Labour's plan for toothbrushing lessons, I want to know, are we becoming a nanny state, or is this the way to save the NHS? Please do get in touch. Send me your thoughts on gbviews at gbnews.com. Message me on all our socials. We're at GB News. But first, let's get the news headlines with Tamsin.
Emily, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 12 o'clock. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says he's shocked by this morning's attacks in Israel and that the country has an absolute right to defend itself. Thousands of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip in a surprise attack by the Hamas militant group. This video shows Palestinians using a bulldozer to break through a fence separating Gaza with southern Israel as gunshots are heard in the distance. Israel's defence minister said Hamas has launched a war and its troops were fighting against the enemy at every location. Local news has reported Israeli civilians barricading themselves in their homes in border towns near Gaza, pleading for help. In a televised message, the police chief told residents to stay put and that we will get to you all. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says his country will win this war.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the State of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I convened the heads of security and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists.
Well, earlier I spoke to Con Coughlin, the defence editor at the Daily Telegraph, who says he expects a strong response from Israel.
Fact that the Palestinian militants seem to have taken some Israelis hostage. The Israeli media is reporting that 35 Israelis have been taken hostage. I mean, this is an enormous security failure by the Israeli Defense Forces, and I think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will be determined to respond very strongly against this, and I think you can expect to see a lot of Israeli military activity targeting Hamas strongholds in the Gaza Strip.
To other news now, and the Labour Party has unveiled new plans to clamp down on sexual harassment in the workplace. Speaking at the Labour Party Women's Conference in Liverpool, Angela Rayner says the party has plans to break the class ceiling and the glass ceiling. It comes as new figures show almost 5 million women experience sexual harassment at work each year.
The Labour government will amend the Equalities Act to introduce a legal duty for employers to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. But that's not all. We will make misogyny a hate crime.
SNP leader Humza Yousaf is being urged to rethink plans for independence after Labour's victory in the Rutherglen by-election. Labour's Michael Shanks defeated the Scottish National Party by winning 58% of the vote. It's prompted calls for Yousaf to rethink his proposal that winning the majority of seats at the next general election will be a mandate for negotiations on Scottish independence. Meanwhile, Labour has vowed to work constructively with the Scottish Government if it gets into office. Widespread flooding is expected in parts of Scotland as the country faces a period of relentless rain over the weekend. The Met Office has issued an amber weather warning for a large part of central Scotland, while a yellow weather warning covers most of the country. Travel disruption is also expected, with ScotRail cancelling trains on a number of lines. In contrast, southern areas will have dry weather with temperatures as high as 25 degrees Celsius in some parts. One of Pablo Picasso's masterpieces is going on sale next month and is expected to fetch almost £100 million. The Spanish artist's 1932 work, Femme à la montre, depicts his golden muse, Marie-Thérèse Walter. She had an affair with the painter and was the subject of many Picasso portraits. The painting is being exhibited at Sotheby's in London from today until Wednesday. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Emily.
Thank you, Tamsin. So to our top story. Fighters from the military group Hamas have launched an unprecedented attack on Israel, sending fighters across the border and firing thousands of rockets into the country. At least 22 Israelis have been so far reported killed in the attack, with more than 500 injured. Here's live pictures coming out of Gaza. Now, joining me to discuss this is Tel Aviv-based journalist Natalie Blenford. Natalie, thank you very much indeed for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. Now, as I understand, you were woken up this morning by the sound of a siren. Can you explain what happened?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I was asleep in bed, and I think around 7:30, I just heard the sound of the air raid alert siren, which pierced the air, woke me up, sent me to the shelter. I'm very fortunate. I live in a new building, so just behind me, just out of shot, is a bedroom that doubles as a safe room. And I was able to set that up, barricade myself inside with the person who was sleeping in there, who is actually here on holiday from Sweden, though absolutely nothing to do with the conflict. And she and I sheltered in there for 5 minutes or 10 minutes until it was safe to come out.
Now, it sounds a silly question, Natalie, but how do you feel?
I actually feel okay at the moment. I'm trying to practice kind of moment-by-moment reaction to this and not get kind of scared by the headlines. But my upper lip is trembling, my legs are trembling, so obviously it's not a normal day. The news is obviously terrible. And I'm very fortunate that I'm in Tel Aviv, where I'm further away from Gaza, so I'm not in as much immediate danger. But for what's happening for the communities closer to Gaza, it's really, really quite a terrible situation.
Yes, Natalie, do you have friends and family who you've been in contact with who are closer to where the attack is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally know. I know one person that lives very close to Gaza in a community called Tice, but it's a case of, like, I don't want to drive people mad texting to check they're okay, because it's wonderful that people check in, but it's also somewhat aggravating. So I'm just kind of getting my news in the same way as everyone else. I have an app on my phone from the Home Front Command, which is supposed to beep and tell you when you need to take shelter. But, you know, a lot of it in this day and age is seeing videos on social media and seeing news networks put out footage that they get sent. And it's quite stressful seeing this kind of footage. I mean, we've seen pictures today of these jeeps going down the street in a town called Sderot full of Hamas terrorists with enormous guns. I mean, I don't want to describe it in case there's children listening to this. You know, it's the things you see on powder are playing out in reality.
Yes, and Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, has come out strongly. He says, we are at war and we will win. Presumably you have watched his statement. What else did he say to the Israeli people?
He said that this is a war, this is not an operation, right? Because sometimes when rockets are sent, that there's a kind of brief operation which would deal with that. But he's saying that this is a war, not a round of fighting. And he describes it as by saying Hamas initiated a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel and its citizens. And it's worth also pointing out that whilst Israel's been having a lot of problems recently, internal fighting in the government, that all the members of the opposition have come together this morning and said, in days like this, there is no opposition and no coalition in Israel. E.g., we are one nation, and everyone is now sort of uniting to formulate a response. This isn't a time for infighting within the government.
Yes, and it's worth noting that here in the UK, the Prime Minister and also the leader of the Labour Party, the opposition, have come out strongly to support Israel and its right to defend itself. Are you concerned that this came as a surprise to the Prime Minister in Israel and to the Israeli Defence Force? It seems to me that there may well be some kind of intelligence failure, well, potentially a colossal intelligence failure.
I think it's definitely a surprise, but it's a surprise if it's not a surprise, in that yesterday marked, I believe, 50 years since the Yom Kippur War, which was also a surprise war. It's kind of gone down in history, and it's sort of like a story that gets told every so often. Yom Kippur, of course, being the Day of Atonement, and there was a very big war that's part of the Israeli military history story now. And yesterday was the anniversary of that war. So perhaps there should have been some understanding that the enemies may unite to try and create like a sort of reprise of that, an encore, as it were. It is a failure of intelligence, and I think that even if Hamas is saying this is in response to events in Jerusalem at the Al-Aqsa Mosque yesterday, I don't think anything massive happened, but they don't like it when Jewish worshippers go there, and some did go there, so okay, fine. But this took planning. This is a coordinated attack. This is 2,200 rockets, and these militants who have stormed communities and somehow got from Gaza to the other side into Israel. Like, this is not something you just do in response to something that happened yesterday afternoon. This is planned. So yes, it's been a failure of intelligence. But when you use the word failure in that context, it puts the blame on Israel. Like, Israel has failed to know about it, but also Hamas, with absolutely no right to do this. This goes against all the rules of war. I was reading that there is a convention for how you fight wars, and you don't do it like this.
Yes. In terms of the Israeli response, difficult to say, but how do you see Israel acting going forward, retaliation? Are you concerned that this could escalate into other areas of the region?
Yes, there is concern it can escalate. I think initially they need to focus on securing those communities that you were talking about in the report earlier. So they need to focus on making sure the citizens are safe. There's been some quite horrifying stories coming out from a woman who was in her safe room, which is a sort of bomb shelter. And she said that there's terrorists roaming around with guns, and she and her children are in this room and they're scared to breathe or move. So initially she's asking, why is it taking 4 hours for us to be made safe? So first of all, the military need to secure these communities, get rid of the terrorists from there and get the people out. And at the same time, they probably will launch retaliatory strikes to Gaza, which, will be to take out the rocket launching equipment, because the fact that they were able to send so many rockets, I mean, officially we're saying 2,200, but I've read that Hamas say they sent 5,000 rockets. Now, I think the intention of that was to overwhelm the Iron Dome, and the Iron Dome is the defense system that Israel has in place to stop the rockets hitting buildings and hurting civilians. So if you send 5,000, you're looking to overpower that. So Israel needs to try and disable that equipment so that they can no longer send rockets, which is going to mean a kind of military operation inside of Gaza. That's what it usually means.
Natalie, I think I'm losing you ever so slightly there, but thank you so much for your time. And of course, we hope you are safe and well and continue to be so. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Natalie Blenford there, Tel Aviv-based journalist. Well, there you go. We will be keeping you up to date on the very latest coming from Israel on this massive and unprecedented attack on the country. Now, we'll be coming back to that throughout the show, but following the Lib Dems in Bournemouth and the Tories in Manchester, the Reform UK Party conference kicks off today in London. Nigel Farage is expected to speak at 12:30. We'll be bringing you that live. But what else are we expecting to come from the event? Joining me to discuss this is GB News Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood. Tom, you were there at the Reform Party conference. You've been doing the rounds. What's going on there? What can we expect?
Yes, this is, of course, midway through conference season. We've already heard from the TUC, the Green Party, are having their conference at the moment as well. We've heard from the Lib Dems, we've heard from the Tories, but this is the Reform UK Party conference. And just now, the party leader, Richard Tice, is on the stage behind me, having welcomed joint deputy leaders Ben Habib and Dr. David Bull up onto the stage. They're talking, of course, about the year to come and the growth of this party. It was described earlier on by another party figure, Alex Phillips, as the fastest growing political movement in the United Kingdom. This conference is 3 times the size of the one held by the party in the previous year. And certainly, in objective numbers, the party does seem to be doing all right in the polls, up to around 8% in a number of recent polls. But there's an interesting change that may well be taking place. Eagle-eyed viewers might see a logo behind me, a Brexit Party logo. logo. Why do I say Brexit Party logo? Because the Reform UK Party used to be the Brexit Party, of course, and the words "the Brexit Party" have been added to this new logo. And individuals within the party tell me that when it comes to A/B testing the slogan Reform UK or Reform UK hyphen the Brexit Party, it's the latter that performs higher in polling, in testing. This is a slogan with much more name recognition. So it could be that this new, almost rebrand of the party we've seen for the first time today could send the party's polling that bit higher.
Tom, there's lots of cheering coming from the room behind you. What's on in there at the moment?
Well, it's just been the leader of the party, Richard Tice, and Ben Habib and David Bull up on stage. Ben Habib being announced as a joint deputy leader. Clearly, some more being discussed about the electoral ambitions of the party. And also earlier today, we've heard from Howard Cox, who is their mayoral candidate here in London, and also Alex Phillips, their cultural spokesman. A number of different spokespeople standing up and giving their piece to the around 1,000 delegates here at the conference, but I believe they might be just about breaking up for a break in the session, so we might be seeing a flood of people behind me and the applause die down.
There is indeed a flood of people behind you walking out of that main room there. Just very quickly, I understand Reform Party are on about 7 to 10% of the national vote at the moment if you look at recent polling for the general election. Do we have an idea of which constituencies they're going to be really putting a lot of effort into? Where are they popular?
It's interesting, if you look at how the Brexit Party did in 2019, their single highest polling constituency was Hartlepool. That is where Richard Tice himself stood as a Brexit Party candidate and achieved around 1/3 of the vote in that seat. Of course, there was then later a by-election in Hartlepool where the Conservative Party snatched it from the Labour Party. But I think in reality it's those high Brexit voting areas of the country, perhaps areas that are more marginal between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, where Reform UK feels like it might have its best chance. They haven't announced a list of top targets yet, and of course there are elections that the party is focusing on before the general election, not least the London mayoral election, where of course much resource is being placed, and of course the candidate Howard Cox is taking a strong stand against Sadiq Khan's ULEZ tax. This is of course the next election on the horizon, and I no doubt will learn more and more about the general election strategy as the weeks and months progress.
Well, thank you very much indeed for keeping us up to date on all that is going on at the Reform Party conference. There will be taking live speeches from Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, leader of the party. Thank you very much indeed, Tom Harwood there, our deputy political editor. Right, moving on. Starmer, Keir Starmer that is, has pledged all primary schools in England will have supervised toothbrushing classes in an effort to tackle poor dental hygiene and chip away the backlog facing NHS dentistry. Along with this, it was also announced this week the government will incrementally ban smoking. That's raising the legal age each year until it is completely illegal to smoke in this country. So it might just be me, but it feels a little bit like we're slowly but surely becoming a little bit of a nanny state, and both of the main parties seem to be very much on the same track with it. Joining me now is Head of Lifestyle Economics at the IEA, Christopher Snowdon, and journalist and author Julie Kirk. Chris, we're seeing both the... Thank you for joining me. We're seeing both the Labour Party and the Conservative government very much pursuing the nanny state in terms of authoritarian measures, one might say. So we are looking at a smoking ban, an incremental rise in the age at which you may purchase cigarettes. What do you say to that?
Oh, it's preposterous and illiberal. It's difficult to know where to start with it, really. One can have a go at it on the basis it's completely unnecessary, going to cause all sorts of problems with the black market, the grey market, all sorts of markets. Or you can, just the simple, practical idiocy of it, really. Just the very idea that people in 15 years' time are going to have to be 35 or whatever to buy cigarettes, and people slightly older than them will be able to buy cigarettes. It's obviously not going to work. I think it's almost designed not to work. So at some point in the near future, the anti-smoking groups can come out and say, look, this isn't really working. Let's just ban it for everybody. That's what they're do. I think that's what they will do. I really do.
What do you say, Christopher, to the idea that this will help save the NHS because smoking is costing the NHS billions of pounds a year, and therefore the fewer people that smoke, and bans may help with that, the fewer people that smoke, then the better off the NHS will be, and it will last us decades to come?
It's complete and utter piffle. It's delusional rubbish. It's like the Wicker Man or something. You know, the idiot villagers going after somebody and burning them because the crops have failed. The NHS fails for lots of reasons. And rather than deal with the problems with the NHS, we just scapegoat various people. It's not fat people, it's smoking. The evidence is really, really clear about this in the economics literature around the world. You know, £1 billion in tobacco duty. They use less healthcare over the course of a lifetime because their lifetime is shorter. They take less out in pensions. Smokers are subsidising non-smokers. People need to get that through their head. If they're serious about sorting the NHS out, they need to proper reforms rather than scapegoating people.
Julie, I'll bring you in. Do you think that politicians scapegoat smokers and also obese people when they talk about the NHS?
I think they do, but I don't think we'd call it scapegoating. I think it's just true. People who smoke die younger, they likely suspect disease, they cost the NHS money. You know, all these things are obvious from the fact that there was a white paper out that I think 13 people die an hour from smoking in this country. So it's a no-brainer, really, that if we're going to be honest about health now and healthcare in the NHS, we need to look at who's using it, who's requiring more help, who dies younger, who needs and takes from the NHS, and that is people who destroy their bodies willingly themselves.
As Chris just said, he just said that actually smokers cost the NHS less. It may sound a bit morbid, but they die younger, so therefore need less care over the length of their lives.
Oh, I've lost you. I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll go back to Chris. Let's hope we can get Julie back on the line there. Christopher, are you concerned with this announcement or this planned announcement from Labour on toothbrushing, supervised toothbrushing? Because some people say, well, you know, back in the day we used to have a bit of this, Scotland is doing it too, and if kids aren't brushing their teeth at home, then the state should step in and help them with that. What do you think?
Well, teaching young children to do things, I don't think you call nanny statism. You know, nanny statism is when you treat adults like children. I haven't seen the details of the toothbrushing plan. It doesn't seem to me to be such a very bad idea. I'm afraid there are children who have terrible parents who maybe don't encourage them to brush their teeth. Certainly learning to brush your teeth would be much more useful than a lot of rubbish people get taught in primary school. So, you know, I've seen a lot of right-wingers kind of dunking on Starmer for suggesting this. But let's remember the Tory solution to the tooth decay was to put a tax on sugary drink. The Tory policy was far more top-down, big government nanny-state than what Labour is planning to do here, which is actually pretty conservative to educate people.
That's interesting. So vaguely supportive, broadly supportive of the idea of supervised toothbrushing for 3 to 5-year-olds from Christopher there. Julie, what do you think? Because the Head Teacher Association has come out quite strongly to say this should not be a priority. Teachers have other things to worry about. They're not there to supervise the toothbrushing of your children. What do you think?
Yeah, well, this is where I agree with the teachers. I really think that teachers have far more important things to do than worrying about teeth. I also think that they are overworked as it is. They're doing longer hours than ever, and I don't think teeth brushing is part of their domain when they enter the education world. I also think if you're a parent, this is one of the basic things you should be able to do for your children. It goes along with getting them washed and dressed in the morning, feeding them breakfast, brushing their teeth. It's kind of a no-brainer. I don't see why we need to be patronising teachers and parents regarding this.
Well, there we go. 2 different views on that one. Chris, do you think you study the nanny state and you've written all sorts of papers and reports on this? Do you think it's in our human nature to want to ban things that we disapprove of or ban things that we don't do ourselves? Because the smoking, this announcement on smoking, is going down quite popular when you look at the polling.
Yeah, I don't know if this is part of human nature, but it does seem to me that a significant minority of people at any one time do have this instinct of trying to get people to live the way they want you to be. And I'm not sure where that comes from. Obviously, I don't really harbour such feelings myself. But it generally has been a minority. But with this issue, yeah, you're right. It is a majority according to the polls, particularly amongst conservative voters. 60, 70, 80% are in favour of this. But then you have to remember that nobody who's voting in these polls is going to be affected by this at all, or at least they think they won't, because the idea is that existing smokers will be able to carry on smoking. I don't think that will happen in practice, but people have been sold a pig in a poke. But the point is, everybody who's voting in these polls, you have to be 18 to take part in these surveys, is not going to be affected in the slightest. The people whose liberty is going to be restrained by this either haven't been born yet or they're not 18. So unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are quite happy to take away other people's freedoms.
I'm sorry, that's all we've got time for, but thank you very much indeed for both of your views. That's Christopher Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs, Head of Lifestyle Economics there, and journalist and author Julie Cook. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We got through quite a lot there, from toothbrushing to smoking ban to whether wanting to ban things that other people do is just part of our human nature, or at least it seems to be part of politicians' human nature. Yes, if you're in favour of this, I'm sure there are people who are smokers who are in favour of this ban because it won't be them that are impacted. But then again, we all know how bad for our health smoking is. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Emily Carver. Let me know what you think about that one. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Nigel Farage will be opening the Reform UK Party Conference. That's taking place in London today. We'll be speaking live straight after the break. All of that and more to come. You're watching and listening to GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening. from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 12:30. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says he's shocked by this morning's attacks in Israel and that the country has an absolute right to defend itself. Thousands of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip in a surprise attack by the Hamas militant group. This video shows Palestinians using a bulldozer to break through a fence separating Gaza with southern Israel as gunshots are heard in the distance. Israel's defence minister said Hamas has launched a war and its troops were fighting against the enemy at every location. Local news has reported Israeli civilians barricading themselves in their homes in border towns near Gaza, pleading for help. In a televised message, the police chief told residents to stay put. We will get to you all. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country will win this war.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the State of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I convened the heads of security and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists.
Earlier, I spoke to Con Coughlin, the defence editor at the Daily Telegraph, who says Israel's been taken by surprise.
The fact that the Palestinian militants seem to have taken some Israelis hostage, the Israeli media is reporting that 35 Israelis have been taken hostage. I mean, this is an enormous security failure by the Israeli Defence Forces, and I think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will be determined to respond very strongly against this, and I think you can expect to see a lot of Israeli military activity targeting Hamas strongholds in the Gaza Strip.
That is the latest on Israel. We'll, of course, keep you up to date with this story. That's all from me for now. Now it's back to Emily.
Thank you, Tamsin. Welcome back to GB News Saturday. I'm Emily Carver. It has just gone 12:30. So today is the party conference for Reform UK, with a speech expected from Honorary President and GB News host Nigel Farage, followed by the party leader, Richard Tice. So as soon as those speeches begin, we'll be throwing straight to them and getting reactions straight off the back. But joining me now, he needs no introduction, but it is the Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who is with us, who is down at the conference hall there. Tom, Reform UK, as we know it, anti-net zero, pro-border control, anti-ECHR. Nigel Farage just 13 minutes ago posting on his Twitter feed, on his X feed, only Reform Party UK is serious about leaving the ECHR to complete the Brexit process. Is that going to be the main talking point?
It certainly is one of the large talking points. And of course, there was a lot of speculation around Nigel Farage in Manchester last week, or earlier this week, I should say, when Nigel Farage was parading around the Conservative Party conference for the first time in 30 years. Well, today he's perhaps coming back home. The Reform Party, of course, is born out of the Brexit Party, which Nigel Farage founded in 2019. It went on to win the European elections, of course, and changed the course of how the Brexit process really went, with Theresa May announcing her resignation not long after those European election results came through. The Conservatives came fifth in those elections, with many, many natural Conservative voters turning to the predecessor of this party. But since then, this party has been under a bit of a face change, a branding shift. It's turned itself into Reform UK, which, whilst it has less name recognition than the Brexit Party, it still is bumbling around 8% in the polls, which is not to be sniffed at, and is certainly nipping at the heels of Rishi Sunak. Certainly, if you speak to people here at this conference today, they believe the power of Reform UK is what has been pressuring Rishi Sunak into some of his policy reversals in recent weeks, not least the Prime Minister's about turn on net zero targets, but also perhaps some of his more fervent cultural language in Manchester on Wednesday, where he was speaking about transgender issues in a more forthright way than I think perhaps we've ever heard him speak before. So certainly people here at the Reform UK conference believe this party has influence, although speaking to people at the top of the party, they believe that this party could be doing more. It could be polling better were the name recognition higher. There's a general admission that the Brexit Party as a name, as a brand, was a much stronger brand than Reform UK. It had far higher name recognition across the United Kingdom than the more amorphous and less defined words Reform UK. And so today what has happened is a bit of a branding change for this new party. No longer does the logo just say Reform UK. It now says Reform UK, the Brexit Party, bringing back those three words onto the logo just at the bottom, perhaps to give a little reminder to potential voters in local elections this May, and also perhaps in a general election in the autumn, that this is the successor movement to the Brexit Party. And insiders in the party tell me that adding those words, Reform UK, the Brexit Party, significantly increases the name recognition and the polling level of this party when they've tested it.
Now, Reform UK, we just saw pictures there while you were speaking of Nigel Farage being accosted or interviewed by Owen Jones, the Guardian columnist, who tends to make a video every year at Conservative Party conference. And of course, he spoke to Nigel Farage, who gave him quite a bit of time to talk about what he wanted to there. It was quite funny at the time I saw it in person. In terms of Reform UK and its relationship with the Conservative Party, they are a bit of a thorn in the side, are they not? They're polling at about 7 to 10% at the moment. Could make it more likely than it is now that Labour get into power in terms of stealing some of that Conservative vote.
That's always been the Conservative criticism of parties like the Brexit Party in the 2019 general election, like UKIP in 2015, like Reform UK now. However, what the individuals behind these three parties have always said in each successive election is that without this sort of movement, the Conservative Party would be drifting even further away from Conservative principles. And certainly listening to the speech of Alex Phillips, the culture spokesman of Reform UK, a little bit earlier on this morning, she was saying that the Conservative Party has been presiding over cultural decline, and it's right to be challenging that party. In fact, many supporters UK would like to see nothing more than the Conservative Party be turfed out of power. Whether or not that makes it more likely that the Labour Party would get in, and most sophologists would say yes, that does make it more likely that Labour gets in. There'll be many people here that would say, well, what's the difference? Of course, the Conservative Party conference in Manchester earlier this week was trying to emphasise that there is a clear difference, that there is a greater difference between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party than there was perhaps this time last year, and perhaps it is the strength in polling, the 8 or so % that the Reform Party is grabbing in these polls, that has influenced some of these position changes from Rishi Sunak.
Now, it looks like Nigel Farage is going to turn up fashionably late, but as we can see, that hall is starting to fill up very quickly indeed. There was a woman just behind you dancing and trying to get on the camera, so that was nice. Alex Phillips, you mentioned her. She made a speech earlier. What did she concentrate? Was she talking about things like British history being denigrated? Was she talking about things like the removal of statues? Was she talking about transgender issues? What did she have to say?
there was a big focus on gender issues. There was a big focus on online issues. Surprisingly, perhaps, Alex Phillips said that she was in support of the online safety bill, this online harms agenda and the age verification mandates coming in for certain adult content online. That was a strong line in her speech. It might surprise some members of this party, given it has a bit of a libertarian streak in it, but clearly there was a strong line of cultural conservatism, of quote-unquote family values, and of course a big emphasis in what Alex Phillips was describing as the sort of moral decline of the Conservative Party. Now, I suppose that's open to interpretation, but certainly a lot of emphasis there on family, on relationships, on gender, and on the access to explicit material online.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We'll be coming back to you when Nigel Farage does appear, but I'm going to get the opinion, thank you, Tom, going to get the opinion of Matthew Stadlin here, political commentator. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So, your take on what you've just heard there?
Well, I thought that was excellent analysis from Tom. In terms of the significance of this gathering of Reform UK, the Brexit Party, as it's now naming itself, I think the biggest thing is that Nigel Farage is opening the conference. Yeah. And why is that important? It's important because it puts into some extra context Nigel Farage's appearance at the Conservative Party conference. He almost took over. He generated so many of the headlines. A big story, I think perhaps even initiated by Patrick Christys here at GB News, is would the Tories welcome Nigel Farage into their midst? And the fact that Rishi Sunak equivocated was very significant. They will be desperate that Farage does not throw his considerable weight behind Reform UK. Why? Because that would drain some of the votes from the Conservatives. Now, my analysis, and I'm very distant from what Reform UK stands for as a person, but my analysis as a commentator is that I think they won't get many votes at the next election. They are, as we've heard from Tom, the inheritors of the Brexit Party. The Brexit Party only got 2% of the vote at the 2019 general election. I'm not sure how much it will help them to be rebranding themselves.
These are, sorry, Matthew, to interrupt you, but these are live pictures of Nigel. Oh, someone's very happy to have got a photo. See, this is what I'm talking about. The celebrity status of that man is huge. On the right, of course, but just as a character in our national, history.
It is indeed. There was a poll out just a few days ago that had Reform on 5%. I don't think they will do well at the next election, but where they have big influence is, as Tom was saying, dragging the Conservative Party further to the right. I think he's right in his analysis that without Reform UK and their campaigning on various culture war issues, I don't think that Sunak would have done some of the U-turns that he's made. In terms of their electoral significance, I think it's minimal, but I think the Conservatives are nonetheless frightened of it.
And it seems to me, and I may be wrong on this, but it seems to me what's important to Nigel Farage is building that coalition of people who agree with him on certain issues, whether it's net zero, whether it's immigration, whether it's the European Union. And it doesn't matter necessarily whether they're in the Conservative Party or in the Reform Party or anywhere else. I mean, we saw him dancing with Priti Patel at Conservative Party conference, very much having conversations with people regardless of party.
Yeah, indeed. Nigel Farage, and again, I'm very distant from him politically and stand against him in much of what he stands for.
Don't worry, no one thinks you are.
But as an analyst, of course, he is a brilliant campaigner and he can bring a lot of people with him. However, he has himself stood as an MP 7 or 8 times and failed on every single occasion, and I think Reform UK will fail at the next election. It's about their influence.
They've just been asked to take their seats. This is an old footage you're seeing from the Conservative Party conference. I believe we can go to the Reform conference now. Not ready quite yet, but we are expecting, if you're just joining us now, we are expecting Nigel Farage to take to the stage and talk to the delegates there at the Reform Party conference. Lots of big names there. that you may well have heard of, you may well support. Alex Phillips, who is their culture representative, she was talking earlier about what she sees as cultural decline of the country under the Conservatives. Also, Ben Habib, Richard Tice, of course, the leader, will be hearing from him later, which I'm sure he needs no introduction, and other big names like Belinda DeLucy. So, Matthew, do you think, I mean, I'm just looking at our inbox here, and there are a lot of people who have lost faith in the Conservative Party. And I've got a message here from John who says, Reform are the only party that can save the country. I'm sick of all the lies from the main parties. It does seem that there are a lot of people who are thoroughly disappointed in both parties.
I think that's undoubtedly true. The scale of that, I'm not convinced about. As I said in this recent poll, just 5% throwing their weight behind reform.
Right, I'm sorry to interrupt you once more, Matthew, but I think Nigel Farage is just getting his introduction, so we'll be going to him in just one moment, I believe, if I'm getting that right. Oh, we can keep talking for a little longer. He's making his way through the crowds.
You listed some of those names, like Ben Habib. I'm not sure that these people are national figures, certainly yet, but they appear regularly on GB News, and we know that GB News has an increasing influence. We know that senior former cabinet members were talking up GB News. Liz Truss was talking up GB News, and others as well, including
very loudly indeed.
They're very loudly. And in other words, what I'm saying is that these people have a bigger influence than perhaps their national recognition value, and the influence, as I've said, is dragging the Conservative Party further to the right. So if they have successes on their terms, I don't think it's about winning seats at the next general election. It is about influencing the party of government, which at the moment is the Conservatives, and I think that they are doing that.
Yes, I think that's right. And, of course, Anne Widdecombe, too. She is the spokesperson on immigration and justice, so you can understand what kind of policy might come from Anne. We hear from her a lot on this channel, and she is still across all of the media talking about these kind of issues. She is absolutely adamant that the UK should leave the European Court of Human Rights.
There is a very big conversation at the moment about the future of Conservative politics in this country, and Nigel Farage is at the heart of it, and it's been fascinating to see him straddle both the Conservative Party conference and now the Reform UK Party conference. As I've said, that is why the Tories are slightly panicking about him, because they don't want him to drain votes at the next election.
Right, that's it, Matthew. We have now Nigel Farage taken to the stage at the Reform Party conference held in London. Are we going live there? I believe we are in just one moment. I'll be speaking there. He is. Lots of applause.
Hello, all right. Thank you very much indeed. Hello, how are we? All right? Hello there.
Well done, Ron. I want the day.
Good morning, everybody. As you know from the music, I'm fresh back from Manchester, where I had a pretty good time. Some people got it. It was an extraordinary event. I hadn't been to a Conservative conference since the late 1980s. And it was astonishing. The response to me was astonishing. People coming up for selfies and offering me drink after drink. I mean, some of it was murder. It really was. But I was very struck by the Tory activists that they're, in a sense, a lost tribe. A lost tribe. Desperate to believe in something, desperate to believe in somebody, and know they're headed inevitably towards a very big defeat at the next general election. A big defeat. But what was so interesting was not what was said on stage, but what wasn't said on stage. Oh, on stage we had Suella Braverman. You know, she talks about invasions, she talks about hurricanes and all of those things, but actually, did she offer any solutions? And Rishi Sunak, as Alison Pearson so correctly said in the Telegraph, if you'd asked people for their top 25 priorities, banning smoking, which let me assure you I am not in favour of, and rejigging A-levels wouldn't even have been in the top 25, maybe not even in the top 50. So whilst it was very nice to be welcomed by their delegates in the way that I was, and whilst it was generous of the Prime Minister when asked a question by Christopher Hope, now of GB News, to say, oh, well, you know, the Conservative Party is a broad church, so perhaps we could welcome Nigel in as a member once again after 30 years of the Conservative Party. So I've come this morning to bring you my decision. And I don't want to spoil your day or anything like that. The very thought that I would rejoin a party who we, as the Brexit Party, helped in the most astonishing way, and we did it. We did it. We did it within 6 weeks of launching by winning that European election in 2019 and getting rid of one of the worst Prime Ministers in British history, Theresa May. She still seems to want to hang around, goodness only knows why. And we did it by pushing the Brexit agenda. Boris Johnson would never have become Prime Minister had it not been for the efforts of this movement and this party. No question. And, somewhat controversially perhaps, I was very, very generous to him in that general election in 2019. And some of you agreed with it, and some of you didn't agree with it. And that's what life's like. You have to make decisions as a leader and stand by them. I still believe that the idea of a Liberal Democrat, Jeremy Corbyn coalition and a second referendum would not have put the country in a good place. So maybe Rishi thought, given that I'd been so nice to them, at the end of 2019, that I could be tempted to rejoin a party that has betrayed many of those Brexit promises. Maybe he thought I could be generous to a party that has seen legal, let alone illegal immigration, reach record levels. Maybe he thought I could be generous to a party who've just put up corporation tax on our small businesses by 30% and refused to review the IR35 rules. Maybe he thought I could be generous to a party who locked us down 3 times, wholly unnecessarily, with a long-term health cost to this country that'll prove to be ruinous. Maybe he thought I was going to be generous to a party that has now become a social democrat party in all but name. Big state, high tax, control of every aspect of your life, virtually indistinguishable, frankly, from Starmer's Labour Party. Well, I've come today to give my answer. Very, very sweet of you, Prime Minister. But I'm really sorry. The answer is no, I will not. So, my efforts and my work will be solidly behind Richard Tice and Reform UK. Make no doubt about that. By the way, you may not know this, but I'm not a big fan of the British banks. What a campaign that's been, and it's barely started. But what you may not know is that Metro Bank are now in real trouble. Their share price is down 99% from the peak, and they're in desperate trouble. And I should, of course, be generous of heart and say that I'm sorry for the travails of Metro Bank. Do you know Metro Bank gave notice on the Brexit party's bank accounts, foreclosed on us, told us immediately they would not do business for our party, put us into the most precarious position 2 years ago. So I'm sorry, Metro Bank. What goes around comes around. Maybe that'll teach them. Political debanking is not a very good idea, particularly when still a majority of this country actually are good, common sense people. Now, look, if I'm good at one thing, I'm not good at very many, but if I'm good at one thing, I'm good at spotting gaps in the market. And right now, there is the most almighty gap in the UK political market. It's enormous. This party has been bubbling away quietly just under the radar. It feels to me a little bit like UKIP was back in 2012, 2013. Not being talked about much, but quietly, slowly, solidly, organically growing in support, candidates and the calibre of people that want to stand for it. And so, actually, for us to be already at 8% in the polls, and with the rather excellent, genuine and sincere Howard Cox leading our campaign in London, and what a great job he's doing. We're actually making good, solid, steady progress. But we're about, as a party, to enter into new space because of what was not said at that Conservative Party conference, and what will not be said by Sir Keir Starmer at the Labour conference in Liverpool this week. For one, you'll have noticed that we put Brexit back onto the logo. We lent Brexit to Boris Johnson at an 80-seat majority. And they've had ownership of Brexit for all this time. And whilst we may stand taller in the world as a result of Brexit, and by goodness we do, whether it's the AUKUS deal or leadership, whether you agree or not with it in Ukraine, domestically, the reason we won the vote, the reason the turnout was higher than the pundits expected, was because people wanted us to take back control of our borders. And we haven't done that, have we? We haven't done that. Anybody working in small business assumed and believed that with Brexit we'd find ourselves without the same regulatory burden. And in fact, they've barely got rid of any rules at all, and indeed our own enforcement authorities in many cases are still making life virtually impossible for men and women trying to run their own businesses. They have not delivered on what people's realistic expectations of Brexit were. Now, despite that, our GDP is growing more quickly than France's or Germany's. Even the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, or as he's better known, Andrew Out to Lunch Bailey. Not that I'm against the long lunch, believe me, but because he's like McCavity. Whenever there's a crisis, he's not there, he's out to lunch. Even he says our financial services sector is better with Brexit. The opportunities that were offered to us have not been taken. So let's be clear. The Conservative Party is no longer in any way, shape or form the Brexit Party. We in Reform are taking back the word Brexit, and we will champion it and the benefits that it can bring to people in this country. It's ours once again. And the other extraordinary thing in the conference, do you remember a week before the conference, Suella Braverman goes to New York and gives this big defiant speech and talks about the ECHR and how we might just possibly consider at some point, maybe if and when, that this may not be the right thing for us, at which the Attorney General directly contradicts her. Do you know, in all of that speech of Suella's, she did not mention once that four-letter word, ECHR. And Rishi Sunak, in his speech, when he wasn't banning things and trying to make us all do algebra to the age of 18, I don't know about you, I'd simply have bunked off, I think. I mean, mind you, I quite often did anyway, but he did not even mention ECHR. Let us be clear, the European Convention on Human Rights, backed up by its court in Strasbourg, staffed by men and women who in most cases have no legal training whatsoever, and one of whom decided last year that that plane could not fly to Rwanda, was set up with thinking of the late 1940s after the abuses and atrocities that had happened in Austria and Germany throughout the 1930s. But it is now completely and hopelessly and totally out of date in every single way. It has, through judicial activism, gone way beyond the original aims of its founders. And I want to be clear that Reform UK will stand at the next election clearly and unequivocally as the party that wants the process of Brexit to be completed, and that means getting back control of our borders and our judiciary. We will leave the ECHR. Leave the ECHR. No question. And the Labour Party believe in it, and the truth is the vast majority of Conservative MPs still believe in it. We will campaign for our independence to be completed. It should have happened at the time of Brexit. We will make sure that in the end it happens. But the other extraordinary, gigantic elephant in the room, and it's there in politics, and it's there in media too, and nobody wants to talk about it. It is the issue that is having the biggest impact on the lives of ordinary families in this country. It is the issue that makes the number of houses you build, frankly, almost irrelevant. Did you notice Sunak didn't mention housing once in his speech? What is the point? Even if you reach your target of 300,000 new dwellings every year if net migration is running at 600,000 every year? How can people expect to get GP appointments or their kids into local schools, or to be able to estimate a journey time that might have been an hour 20 years ago is now 2 hours if you're lucky? Legal net migration is running at a record number. Our population has risen by 10 million since Tony Blair came to power. We are living through a population explosion. We are living through a population crisis. And the quality of life for every family in this country is being directly diminished as a result of it. And this has nothing to do with religion and nothing to do with race. It's about good, plain, common sense. The first duty of a British government is to look after the integrity and safety of its own country and its own people, and we cannot go on living in a country that de-skills its own young by forcing them all off to university and massive debt, and the corporates relying on mass, cheaper, imported foreign labour. We have to completely turn this around. And I can see it all now. I can see it all now. And it'll be Richard's job to take the abuse next time, not mine. Which I'm very much looking forward to. And we'll be told that it's xenophobic. We'll be told that it's small-minded to limit the number of people who legally can come to Britain. But it's not. It's about our community. It's about our society. It's about its identity. It's about fairness. And it's about our children and grandchildren having anything like the hope of the same living standard that we've enjoyed. If we go on down this route, that literally will be destroyed. And again, it'll be this party at the next general election making the point, oh, they'll call it right-wing. They'll call it right-wing. And yet, polling shows that 2/3 of people think that immigration into Britain, the numbers are simply too high and they need to be reduced. This isn't right-wing. We are at the centre ground of public opinion in this country. Anyway, enough from me. I'm only the honorary president. But you can tell I'm right behind you, and I'll be helping in every way in which I can. And well done to the hundreds of you who've already come forward as candidates. This party can't win the next election. We're not going to delude ourselves with that. But what this party can do, and what this party will do, is to reshape the national political debate in this country, and it will do it irrevocably, and it will do it in a way that is a good thing for the people of our country and of our communities, and we will be the catalyst, longer term, for much greater, radical and much needed change. We'll have to live with 5 years of a Labour government. But then, how much worse could they be? I mean, what would they do? Would they let dinghies cross the English Channel full of young men? Yes. Would they put taxes up to a 71-year high? I mean, frankly, I'm not sure you'll really know the difference with a Labour government to a Conservative government. We are, as we've been in the past with all my campaigns, Geoffrey Titford sitting there, whose 90th birthday comes up in a couple of weeks, was with me in UKIP. And Geoffrey, it took us many years to win, didn't it? But win we did. Win we did. Reform is about to break through. You wait, the polls are going to start to move. You'll start to be talked about. You'll know you're doing well when the press start being really rude about all of you. Because that's the way that it works. But we can and will reframe, reshape the debate and the actions of this country in an historic way, and I believe that with all my heart. But I want you to remember this. I did nearly 21 years in the European Parliament and nearly 30 years from the birth of UKIP campaigning for us to leave the European Union. And I just felt I'd had enough. My time was done. I wanted to do other things. And actually, I think through broadcasting, I've been able to achieve a fair bit of influence doing that too. Arguably, with the banking campaign, I've achieved more as a broadcaster than perhaps I could have done as a politician. But to keep political parties going through difficult times is hard. You see, when Boris got the 80-seat majority, everybody said, Brexit reform, you're not needed now. You can close down because Boris and the Conservatives are going to deliver. Well, I was always sceptical. I wasn't sure. But without Richard Tice, without his time, his effort, his endeavour, his willingness to travel all around the country on a regular basis to meet you, to help build local groups, to help find candidates, and frankly, if we're being honest, without his own generosity of putting his hand in his pocket to keep this party going, and to quite some considerable degree, we would not even be here today. I would not be on this platform with you discussing what we can do to change the future history of our country. So we all in this room, and more broadly, those of us that believe and understand that British democracy needs more than just two voices, we all owe Richard Tice simply the most enormous debt. And so, it is my duty and my honour to introduce now to the stage the leader of Reform UK, one Richard Tice.
From Nigel Farage, the honorary president of the Reform Party. He's made it crystal clear, really, that he is going to be sticking with the Reform Party. There was lots of talk of him potentially wanting to get back in with the Conservatives. He's put that to bed, says he wants to stick with the Reform Party. Now it is Richard Tice who takes the baton. He is, of course, the leader of the Reform Party, getting his photo taken there with Nigel.
Thank you very much. Wonderful, wonderful to have him back after that secret undercover mission we sent him on in Manchester earlier this week. He's reported back safe and sound. Almost like James Bond, suave, in plain sight. It's wonderful. I mean, the size of this conference is fantastic. Absolutely remarkable. 2 years ago, we were about 350. Last year, about 650. This year, 1,000 plus. If we were a company listed on the stock market, we'd be the growth stock of the year. We'd be like the next Google. And who knows? And Nigel's been very kind about me, but I just want to, firstly to say a huge thank you, not only to Nigel, but also to everybody involved within the party, because actually it's a massive team effort. This stuff doesn't just happen overnight. It takes masses of work. Our headquarters team are absolutely brilliant, led by the superb Chief Executive, Paul Oakton. A huge thank you to Paul and our HQ team. And to my deputy, David, and my new deputy as well, Ben Habib. More of him a bit later. Now, I'm sure it's absolutely on all of your lips that there are 78 days to go until Christmas, 78 shopping days. So being a generous man, I thought, well, what am I going to buy my fellow political leaders for Christmas? Rishi, dear Rishi, I think he needs a couple of pairs of long socks to close the gap between the top of his shoes and the bottom of his trousers. We know he's frugal, but really, surely he can afford some new trousers, not his school trousers. And then I thought of dear Keir. Difficult choice. Flip-flops. No, not good enough. No, I thought actually what he needs one of Blackadder's codpieces to protect himself because he sits on the fence so much. And then there's some other bloke, Ed Davies. Anyone know how you find him? Anyone know where he is? I concluded actually he doesn't deserve a present. I'm sorry, Ed. But actually I thought we'd just remind ourselves about a bit of biology, because Keir and Ed seem a little bit confused. So there's a short clip, hopefully, that will play on the video of Keir and Ed with Nick Ferrari. Play it away.
So a woman can have a penis? I'm not. Sorry, I'll get this. Did you? No, it's just... No, I just... So a woman can have a penis? Well, quite clearly.
I mean, you couldn't make it up. How do you think Putin's going to feel faced with that on the other side of a negotiating table? He's going to be terrified, isn't he? What about Xi Jinping? I mean, for God's sake, we can't have these people running our country. You'll be pleased to know that I do know what a woman is. And more than that, I'm actually a very lucky man, because I'm blessed with the support not just of one great woman, but two great women. Yes, because I know you might say that's greedy, but I have huge support and help and affection from the wonderful Isabel, which I massively, massively appreciate. And my God, in her own right, hasn't she helped the country with the lockdown files? But secondly, the other woman in my life, who is also strong, powerful, and not to be messed with, but is actually very generous with some seriously great advice, wisdom, and political knowledge, is, of course, Wid, as I call her, Anne. You'll be hearing from Anne later. Now, what I did discover when I was thinking about this, about the Lib Dems, it seems to me that the only thing they're good at is accumulating knighthoods. I mean, you've got Sir Vince Cable, Sir Nick Clegg, Sir Ed Davey. I mean, what do they give Nigel? Ah, I remembered. They gave him a hurricane named after him. Hurricane Nigel. And that's the truth. A lot more influence and a lot more powerful force. It's only 3 letters to Hurricane Richard. Anyway, to the serious business of the day. Because the truth is, the country is in a shocking, shocking state. Let's be under no illusion, the con-socialist Tories have broken Britain. Labour will bankrupt Britain, as they always do. And it'll be left to Reform UK's policies, frankly, to save Britain. So let's just look at how the Tories have broken Britain. Firstly, we've got workless Britain. A record number, 5.4 million people on out-of-work benefits. We've got waiting Britain, a record high in terms of hospital waiting lists. You have to join a secret waiting list in order to join the official waiting list of almost 8 million people. We've got lawless Britain. Shoplifting completely out of control, knife crime completely out of control. But the Tories, in their absolute brilliance, they said, right, we're going to ban machetes as long as it's got a logo on. So guess what? The machete manufacturers manufactured machetes without logos on. They're still legal. That's the incompetence of these people. Absolutely shocking. And then another massive bugbear. I have to say, I've got so many bugbears at the moment. We've got net zero Britain. Boo, quite right. Be under no illusion. And I've got a new spot with GB News. And every Sunday, Britain's favourite Sunday sermon. Do listen out for it. Last week, I started, and I'm genuinely, my first Sunday sermon with them last week, I banged on about net zero. If you haven't seen it, take a look back. Had well over 130,000 views. I talked about the greatest financial negligence that's ever been imposed on this country by its leaders. It is an absolute shocker. It's sending our jobs and our money overseas. It is a catastrophe. Now, if you want to laugh, ask your friends, and your friends of friends, just ask them how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. You'll get some hysterical replies. You'll get head scratching. You'll go, oh, I don't know, 5%, 20%. I've even had 50% quoted to me by people that I thought were intelligent. I know you all know the answer. It's 0.042 of 1%, but that's impossible to understand. What is that? Well, I thought we'd use a bit of an example. So I'm hoping now on the screen will appear a picture of Wembley Stadium, a full Wembley Stadium. It's 100,000 people. 0.042 of 1% is 42 people in that stadium. It's basically a football team, subs, some dodgy manager and a few physios. Unless it's Jurgen Klopp, in which case it's fine. That is the total amount of CO2 in the atmosphere if you assume that those 100,000 people represent the atmosphere. The UK is responsible for 1%. That's 0.4 of one person in that stadium. That's basically, it's a couple of legs or a couple of arms. Ah, I'm not finished. No, because, of course, there's a lot of natural CO2. And scientists will argue, how much is the human-induced CO2? Some people say it's as low as 3, 4, 5%. Some say it's 50%. I'm a generous man today. I'll tell you what, it's 50% of all CO2. So that's 0.2 of one person. It's one limb, whether it's a leg or an arm, in the whole of Wembley Stadium. That is what is the human-induced CO2 from the United Kingdom across the whole planet. And for that, the zealots, the cultists in this new religion, they want us to change our cars, they want us to change our boilers, they want us to travel less, they don't want us to eat delicious, wonderful, succulent steaks. They want to change everything. And we need to tell them that the answer is no. And be under no illusion. Voters across Europe are now rebelling and revolting against this appalling madness. Meanwhile, China and India, they're building between them about 300 coal-fired power stations. Coal consumption and production is at record highs. I must be on the right track because even Sir Tony Blair, boo, even Sir Tony Blair has admitted that what we do on net zero is completely irrelevant because the growth in China's emissions in every year is just the growth of their emissions is greater than our emissions. It's madness. And it's destroying our jobs and it's sending our money overseas. The only zero, if we're not careful, will be the amount of zero in our children and our grandchildren's bank accounts. And we've got to stop it. We're the only party that has the courage to stand up and tell the truth about this issue. And if you think the vitriol and the abuse we got on Brexit was bad, It's like a round of drinks compared to what it is when we talk about getting rid of net zero. I'll tell you for why, because Brexit was in the heart, it was an emotive, a passionate, a sovereign thing. Whereas net zero, for the vested interests, they can smell, they can touch, they actually are benefiting hugely by this massive transfer of wealth from all of us to those vested interests, and they don't like it. So actually the abuse is even worse. Now, so we will campaign against that. Nigel talked quite rightly about the other issue, which is we are mass immigration Britain. The numbers are so big it's hard to calculate. 2022, 1.2 million people given permission to come and live here. The net number's actually a bit irrelevant because the way they count it, frankly, I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw it. This year there'll be another million plus. Next year, another million plus. And the Tories seem quite happy with it. That's lawful immigration. Illegal immigration, completely out of control again. Totally out of control. They have no idea what to do about it. Warm words as usual, but no idea how to stop the boats. I'll come back to it. We do know how to stop the boats. The illegality that's going on around the country as a function of this. Have you noticed the mushroom in barbershops opening up everywhere? Has our hair suddenly started growing faster because of COVID, for heaven's sake? Or the candy shops, or the car washes. This is all illegal money laundering of money from drug dealing and from other heinous crimes and activities. This illegality is all over the country. No one else dares talk about it. We will, because it's affecting all of our communities, our villages, our towns, and our cities. And then finally, the last thing that's broken about Britain under these Tories, woke Britain. I mean, seriously, this gender ideology has poisoned our institutions, our public sector, our big corporations, and most seriously and horrifically and dangerously of all, it's affecting our children in our schools. But don't worry, the Prime Minister...
Well, we
when
are
he heard
hearing
about...
from Richard Tice, who, of course, is the leader of the Reform Party UK. We'll be bringing you the highlights from that. We were just listening to, before Richard Tice took to the stage, Nigel Farage, who, of course, is the honorary president of Reform UK, Reform Party. So, with me in the studio, we're going to bring some analysis to proceedings. We have Matthew Stadlen and we have Jess Gill. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Matthew, I'll come to you quickly. Well, there's a lot to say there. Nigel Farage came on, all guns blazing, confirmed that he will not be going to the Conservative Party. He will not be... well, he was simply at the conference to see what was going on, and he is very much firmly committed to the Reform Party.
That's the big news line, I think, out of that. Nothing that Richard Tice has said takes the limelight away from Farage. You could see what a brilliant performer he is. We know that already. But he has played the Conservative Party like a fiddle. He flirted with them for days. He danced with Priti Patel. He got Sunak to be equivocal about whether he'd accept him as part of the Conservative Party, and what he's really doing is sticking with Reform UK.
Yes, Jess, he did flirt with the Conservative Party. Do you think he played them like a fiddle?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Conservative Party totally deserve it. They've been an absolute failure for the past decade in terms of immigration, in terms of high taxes, in terms of actually implementing any Conservative policy. Like, I think the only way forward is reform, or if maybe possibly another party, I'm not sure.
But is a vote for Reform a vote for the Labour Party?
I don't think so. I think, as Nigel said, like, realistically, we probably will get Labour in the next general election. And quite frankly, I think the Conservative Party deserve it. After what they've done to this country, they betrayed Britain so many times, it's ridiculous. So I think it will send them a message if voters say, we're not going to vote for Labour, but we're going to vote for Reform because we want more right-wing policies, actual right-wing policies.
Now, Nigel did remind us of the history of the Brexit Party. He said, you know, I helped the Conservative Party hugely, put trust into Boris Johnson, hoping many people put trust into Boris Johnson. He said he was sceptical that he would deliver the Brexit that the country voted for.
What's fascinating about watching Farage there is, as you say, what happened in 2019. He withdrew hundreds of Brexit Party candidates, and that meant that the Conservatives were free to win that 80-seat majority. He's going to do something very different this time around, or so it seems, and that could hurt the Conservatives very severely. Not because Reform are going to win MPs of their own. He mocked Ed Davey. The Lib Dems will win many more seats than the Reform Party. It will hurt the Tories if they hemorrhage Conservative Party votes, and that in the end will help Labour. And I think a key thing to take away from the last week is, as he was flirting, at the very same time as he was flirting with the Conservative Party, Farage was saying loud and clear, and he repeated it there, Labour will win the next election.
Yes, he did continue to say that. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew Stadlen and Jess Gill, for giving us your thoughts on those two speeches, Richard Tice and before that, Nigel Farage. It's interesting to note that they spoke about business, they spoke about woke issues, they spoke about net zero, but fundamentally they spoke a lot about the Conservatives' failure, or what they see as the Conservatives' failure on immigration, both legal and illegal, particular focus on the ECHR, which, of course, the Conservative government have refrained from talking about too much, at least at the conference. So we've got lots more coming up on today's show. We are at war. Those are the words of Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu as fighters from the military group Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israel. We'll bring you the very latest as it happens. All of that and more to come. I am Emily Carver, and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom with the headlines. It's 1:34. Israel's Prime Minister has declared his country is at war after a surprise and deadly attack by the Hamas militant group. Thousands of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip towards cities as far away as Jerusalem this morning, while several Israeli towns were invaded. At least 40 Israelis are dead, with hundreds more injured. This video shows Palestinians using a bulldozer to break through a fence separating Gaza with southern Israel as gunshots are heard in the distance. Israel has launched several retaliatory strikes, and at an emergency cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the country is reinforcing its frontiers. Earlier, he warned that terrorists have infiltrated the country.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the State of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I convened the heads of security and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists.
Well, this morning's attack is being seen as an unprecedented escalation, with an unknown number of Hamas gunmen crossing the border. Earlier, I spoke to Con Coughlin, the defence editor at the Daily Telegraph, who says Israel has been caught by surprise.
The fact that the Palestinian militants seem to have taken some Israelis hostage, the Israeli media is reporting that 35 Israelis have been taken hostage. I mean, this is an enormous security failure by the Israeli Defence Forces, and I think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will be determined to respond very strongly against this, and I think you can expect to see a lot of Israeli military activity targeting Hamas strongholds in the Gaza Strip.
In other news, the Labour Party has unveiled new plans to clamp down on sexual harassment in the workplace. Speaking at Labour's Women's Conference in Liverpool, Deputy Leader Angela Rayner says the party has plans to break the class ceiling and the glass ceiling. It comes as new figures show almost 5 million women experience sexual harassment at work every year.
The Labour government will amend the Equalities Act to introduce a legal duty for employers to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. But that's not all. We will make misogyny a hate crime.
Speaking there. Well, you can get more on those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com. Now, it's back to Emily.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and digital radio. We just heard from Nigel Farage and Richard Tice at the Reform UK Party conference. We'll be bringing you analysis and highlights in the coming hours. Now, Russia and the UN has called for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Palestinians as Islamist group Hamas launched its biggest attack on Israel in years. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called it a terrorist attack. At least 40 Israelis have been killed, with more than 700 Israelis injured. Here's some live pictures coming out of Gaza that you can see there on the screen. So joining me now to discuss this is former head of counterterrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman. Thank you very much indeed, Chip. As we've seen the breaking news there, 40 people have now been confirmed killed, 40 Israelis, many hundreds injured. This is escalating.
Well, it's not escalating yet. I think what you can say is that this is very different than what has come previously. The last Hamas attack was in 2021, an operation that lasted 11 days. What's to look for in terms of escalation is there will be a number of objectives which the Israelis will have straight away. The first one is they'll seek to destroy the rocket launch storage sites. Secondly, they'll seek to regain control of all their population centres. Thirdly, they'll try and decapitate the Hamas leadership. Fourthly, they'll try and deter Hezbollah in Lebanon from joining the fight and potentially Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Fifthly, they need to destroy sufficient Hamas capability so that they reinforce deterrence in the future. And lastly, and most importantly for them, they need to liberate their hostages, which have gone into Gaza. That will probably mean at least some sort of ground operations. Now, the last war, as I said, lasted 11 days in 2021. Hamas actually wanted to stop that after 2 days because of the cost to them. But I think what we'll see in this case is that Hamas might get to choose when a war begins, but they don't get to decide when it ends. And I think the big stick will be very big in this next few days from Israel.
Yes, and it's been said that, well, this is a colossal intelligence failure for Israel. This came as a surprise.
Yeah, well, the job of intelligence is not to produce certainty, but to minimize strategic shocks. And the fact that you had all the sort of domains of land, sea, and air used by Hamas, and the fact they could break over the border and fire 5,000 rockets means that this is absolutely a strategic intelligence failure, certainly on a par with the 50th anniversary, which was celebrated in the last couple of days of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. So that is a massive failure by Mossad, the Israeli intelligence organization. And of course, again, it is a public holiday. So the mobilization takes time. Once that mobilization is there, then there will be this big stick, as I sort of said, that will occur.
In your view, this was likely planned to coincide with that anniversary and also it being a public holiday?
Well, yeah, I think both of those are absolutely true. But I think we also have to remember about Hamas and their position and the fact that they are one of the 5 armies, really, the proxy armies in the Middle East, sustained by Iran. So you've got Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, PMF in Iraq. These are all sponsored by Iran. So it might be that in terms of the damage that Hamas have done, it's not only Hamas that Israel will go after, it may be elements of the capability of Iran, not necessarily in Iran, but in either Lebanon or Syria. That is one of the potential dangers of escalation, but certainly this was a massive intelligence failure, and it takes time to mobilize. Once that is done, then the big stick will be there.
And Chip, what kind of tactics can we expect from the Hamas militant group?
Well, what they've sort of done on a scale which is slightly different than normal is what we call fedayin. That is, they've done both the sort of seize and hold operations in terms of taking people or having people in the sort of bag in some of the settlements, and shoot and scoot and marauding tactics as well. Now, the Israelis, of course, on their side of the border will seek to root all those out. What will become more difficult is if they've gone back to Gaza to then take them on there. So I don't think that they will try and do a seize and hold in scale inside of Israel for the future, because they will just get taken out by either air power or ground power from the Israelis. But, you know, there are dedicated fighters of Hamas who might do that to fight to the death. And one of the things, of course, from them is to try and become the principal rejectionist part in Israel. So in the last war in 2021, they tried to supplant the Palestinian Authority, which is the accommodationist Fatah party in the West Bank. Now, there's a big scale uprisings in the West Bank, and there are also uprisings, for example, in Israeli cities, which there were sort of to some extent in 2021 in Jaffa, Lod, and Accra from, for example, Arab Israelis, then you've got a different problem, or a compounded problem, for the Israeli forces.
Now, for those watching, there will be a concern that this violence that we're seeing here today may encourage or spread elsewhere in the region. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons the violence occurred now, is that really since the Abraham Accords in 2020, we've had a sort of normalization wave between Israel and a number of the Middle Eastern countries, particularly the UAE. And there was talk recently of the Saudi Arabians and the Israelis normalizing it. So I don't think it's coincidental that this is here now. It is trying to derail that as much as to show that we are the force which seeks to expel Israel from where they are as a state, because that is what their vision is. They're not against Israeli policies, they're against Israelis' existence.
Very, very quickly, before I let you go, could we see this play out in the UK in terms of protest?
You always do, because one of the things you have here is colliding narratives about support for Israel against support for what people see as the downtrodden Palestinians. And we've seen this both in 2008 and 2012 and those conflicts. So you will see protests on the streets on both sides.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. Major General Chip Chapman, who was the former head of counterterrorism at the MOD. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I really appreciate that, bringing us the very latest analysis on what is happening in Israel. Unprecedented attack on the country there. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Emily Carver. We've got lots more coming up. Rishi Sunak and Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni have joined forces to tackle migration in what they're calling the European crisis. We'll get the latest on that. More to come. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel. Stay with us.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom. GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Emily Carver. I'm on your TV, online and digital radio until 3 o'clock. Now, Rishi Sunak has backed his government to stop the boats and regain control of the UK's asylum system. And he's found a new ally in his struggle. The Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, joined the Prime Minister in calling for new and immediate measures tackling what they call the European crisis. Sunak, in a joint opinion piece, said that we're proud that Italy and the UK are leading on this together, and even went as far as to say that the UK and Italy were two of the closest friends in Europe today. So joining me now is immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson, international border strategy advisor Henry Bolton. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Henry, I'll start with you. What do you make of this new alliance? Is this what Europe needs to get a grip on the migrant crisis?
Well, it certainly needs somebody to take the lead on it, Emily, and it is better that it's not just one nation. But, you know, in this case, we've got Italy and, in fact, the Netherlands and Albania as well, sort of backed up by the European Commission, who are sort of really in coordination of this. Well, you know, that's the real politic of what's going on here. But, no, of course, we have to cooperate. We have to exchange information and we have to disrupt the organised criminal networks. And in fact, I welcome the 8-point plan that these nations have come up with. It's actually quite good. But at the moment, it's like everything else, it's words. And what actually has to happen is real intelligence and tactical operational disruption of the organised criminal networks on the ground throughout the length of the networks that they're moving people through. And that reaches into North Africa, the Sahel, the Maghreb, East Africa. It reaches into places like Turkey and the Near East. So that's, and in fact, parts of Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, places like the Republic of Macedonia, and so on. So that's got to happen. If we don't have that real operational deployment, backing this up, it's not going to have an effect. And it can't just be a case of intelligence exchange. So I welcome this for what it is, but there's a big piece missing that I don't yet see.
Ivan, I'll come to you in just one moment. And Henry, sorry to put you on the spot, but could you point out some highlights from that 8-point plan that they're getting behind? What's in there?
Yeah, well, so, for example, there is an agreement on operational coordination and cooperation. Now, that, you know, of course, that should be, you know, it should go without question. But when countries actually agree that, then there's a framework for, if you like, the tactical and operational planners to get their heads together and make it work. But so many times working in the international environment, I have seen countries agree to something, make big public headlines about it and say we're agreeing this, but actually the political will internally doesn't actually exist and doesn't empower the operational people to do their work. So we've got that agreement. We've got an agreement to exchange intelligence. We've got an agreement to deploy onto the ground. But we've not got that necessarily, we haven't seen yet, the operational authority disseminated to those agencies that must be part of this.
Yeah.
There should be 12 British government agencies engaged, by my figuring. I don't see that happening yet. If it happens, then I'll give Rishi Sunak, well, so far, never 10 out of 10, but 9 out of 10 for effort on this.
Right, OK, 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 for effort. Yet to see how it turns out. Ivan, what do you think? Is this the alliance, the Italian Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is this the alliance Europe is calling out for?
Look, I don't actually know what the plan is. I mean, where's the actual policies that will stop people crossing the channel? Having alliance is great, and cooperation is great, but the fact remains that we haven't prosecuted a single trafficker of people, not one. So the whole of our resources in the UK, intelligence service, the police and so forth, we've not prosecuted one, not even one. So it sounds more like rhetoric, really. And the problem is that this country doesn't understand our international treaty obligations. The Illegal Migration Act is incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. After that, there's no such thing as unauthorized entry. The Refugee Convention allows you to make unauthorized entry. There's nothing unlawful about it. So, I think we need to get to grips with the law. And what the law says is, if you want to claim asylum, you can come across the channel unauthorized. It's not illegal, it's irregular.
Yeah.
The difficulty for the government is the economic migrants. They are illegal. Why are we not removing them? Why do we not have a treaty with the EU? If the French wanted to stop the boats, they could, simply. They do it with Italy. So when people cross from Italy to France, guess what? The French send them back. They could do it if they wanted to. We need a treaty with the EU to make it a legal footing, an obligation on the French to properly control their borders. Instead, we give them tens of millions of pounds with no performance.
Well, hundreds of millions. Henry, Ivan raises a very good point that a lot of people don't talk about enough. Our law is so confusing and often incompatible with, and contradictory even, with international obligations. This is the problem, and we see this in terms of, in many areas of policy.
Indeed, Emily. Look, I have long advocated that this country needs a fully integrated national strategy, cross-government. This shouldn't be Home Office. It should include Home Office, Foreign Office, Treasury, the Defence Intelligence, SIS, the MI6, MI5, and all of these different agencies all need to come together, Border Force and so on, National Crime Agency. But we don't have it. Now, when you develop such a strategy, as I have done for a number of countries, what it requires first is a full review of the whole comprehensive approach that we've got now to borders and immigration. That's your operational layout, your physical infrastructure, how it's all governed, and crucially, your legislation. I argued with the Border and Immigration Act that, you know, this is a standalone act. It shouldn't be. You should do that review first and say, what do we need legislatively to be able to empower all of our agencies to do this job correctly?
Yeah.
And we
Henry,
don't have that.
I'm terribly sorry, but I'm going to have to cut in there. But thank you very much indeed for your expertise. Henry Bolton there and Ivan Sampson, migration lawyer there. Thank you very much indeed. Let us know what you think. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me. We've got lots more coming up. They'll be back in just one moment. Stay tuned.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh,
Hi, on Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Emily Carver. For the next hour, I'll be keeping you company on your TV, online and digital radio. So, coming up this hour, we are at war. Those are the words of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Fighters from the military group Hamas have launched an unprecedented attack on Israel. We'll bring you the very latest as it happens. Then Nigel Farage says reform will be the catalyst for long-term radical change. At the party conference, we'll be breaking down what he and Richard Tice had to say with our deputy political editor, Tom Harwood. And the Transport Secretary says cancelling HS2 will allow investments that fit the needs of the country. But the £36 billion that would have been spent on finishing the project would fund a number of other transport schemes described as Network North. But is this just another flop waiting to happen? Do you trust the Conservatives? And do get in touch. Send me your thoughts on gbviews at gbnews.com, or please message me on our socials. We're at GB News. But before we get into that, it is your news with Tamsin.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 2. Israel's Prime Minister has declared that his country is at war after a surprise and a deadly attack by the Hamas militant group. Thousands of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip towards cities as far away as Jerusalem, while several Israeli towns were invaded. At least 22 Israelis are dead, with hundreds more injured. This video shows Palestinians using a bulldozer to break through a fence separating Gaza with southern Israel as gunshots are heard in the distance. Local news has reported Israeli civilians in border towns are barricading themselves in their homes, pleading for help. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says terrorists have infiltrated the country.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the State of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I convened the heads of security and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists.
In a sign of regional tensions, Iraq's government has said via a statement that today's attack is the outcome of what it called decades of oppression by a Zionist occupation. Well, earlier I spoke to Con Coughlin, the defence editor at the Daily Telegraph, who says Israel was caught by surprise.
The fact that the Palestinian militants seem to have taken some Israelis hostage, the Israeli media is reporting that 35 Israelis have been taken hostage. I mean, this is an enormous security failure by the Israeli Defense Forces, and I think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will be determined to respond very strongly against this, and I think you can expect to see a lot of Israeli military activity targeting Hamas strongholds in the Gaza Strip.
To other news now. The Labour Party has unveiled new plans to clamp down on sexual harassment in the workplace. Speaking at the Labour Party Women's Conference in Liverpool, Deputy Leader Angela Rayner says the party has plans to break the class ceiling and the glass ceiling. It comes as new figures show almost 5 million women experience sexual harassment at work each year.
The Labour government will amend the Equalities Act to introduce a legal duty for employers to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. But that's not all. We will make misogyny a hate crime.
Also speaking at the conference, Shadow Equalities Secretary Annalise Dodds said Labour would force political parties to disclose information about the diversity of their candidates.
The Conservatives could have done this years ago, but they didn't have the guts. Only Labour will act to make politics more representative of the people we serve. Now, to bring people with different experiences and backgrounds into Parliament, to do the things that only women MPs, black, Asian and minority ethnic MPs, disabled MPs and LGBT plus MPs can do. We need to make sure there's that representation.
SNP leader Humza Yousaf is being urged to rethink plans for independence after Labour's victory in the Rutherglen by-election. Labour's Michael Shanks defeated the Scottish National Party by winning 58% of the vote. It's prompted calls for Yousaf to rethink his proposal that winning the majority of seats at the next general election would be a mandate for negotiations on Scottish independence. Meanwhile, Labour has vowed to work constructively with the Scottish Government if it gets into office. Extreme rainfall and flooding is forecast for Scotland and northern parts of England, with a danger to life warning issued. The Met Office has issued an amber weather warning for a large part of central Scotland, while a yellow weather warning covers most of the country. Travel disruption is also expected, with ScotRail cancelling trains on a number of lines. In contrast, southern areas will have dry weather with temperatures as high as 25 degrees Celsius. One of Pablo Picasso's masterpieces is going on sale next month and is expected to fetch almost £100 million. The Spanish artist's 1932 work, Femme à la montre, depicts his golden muse, Marie-Thérèse Walter. She was the subject of many Picasso portraits, and it was known the pair had an affair. The painting is being exhibited at Sotheby's in London from today until Wednesday. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, it's back to Emily.
Thank you, Tamsin. Now, the big news line coming from Reform Party's conference is that Nigel Farage has confirmed he will not be rejoining the Conservative Party, who, of course, was at the Conservative Party conference, was getting a huge amount of attention, but he has said very clearly, unequivocally, that he is sticking with Reform. So, kicking off the Reform UK conference, he spoke of an almighty gap in the UK political market. That was in his opening speech. He said Reform would reframe and reshape actions of this country, calling it a catalyst for long-term radical change. Now, GB News Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood is there. Tom, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, you've listened to both Farage's speech and Richard Tice, the leader of Reform Party. Can you give us some highlights and how were they received?
Yes, well, of course, Nigel Farage, as with many places he goes, received a rock-star welcome here at the Reform Party conference. And indeed, his main line, perhaps the loudest rounds of applause, even some individuals in the audience standing up and clapping, is that, of course, he was saying he would not be accepting what he described, perhaps cheekily, as Rishi Sunak's offer for him to join the Conservative Party. Of course, if we remember back to our very own Christopher Hope's interview with the Prime Minister earlier this week, the Prime Minister said that the Conservative Party is a broad church and implied that Nigel Farage would be welcome to join. Well, today, the President of Reform, Nigel Farage, also, of course, a GB News presenter, saying that he would not be taking up that offer, that he would be sticking with Reform, that he would be putting all of his energy into campaigning with Reform in the next series of elections. Of course, we're expecting local elections in May and potentially a big general election in the autumn. autumn. Now, it does seem that the Reform Party is gearing up to a new stage in its campaigning cycle, really, and perhaps one of the biggest changes that we've heard today from the party is a bit of a logo change. Yes, no longer does the logo of the Reform Party just say Reform UK, they've added 3 new words. It now reads Reform UK, the Brexit Party. And insiders in the party tell me that this is because the Brexit Party, that strong brand, that brand that won a national election back in 2019, has far higher name recognition across the country than Reform UK alone. And the gamble that this party is taking today is adding those 3 extra words onto their logo could kick up the poll rating for Reform UK from around the 8% that it sits in now into the double-digit territory.
Now, one of the key things that both Nigel Farage and Richard Tice were talking about there is immigration. They say the Conservative Party has let down the country, let down Conservative voters and let down Brexiteers fundamentally for having record highs both in terms of illegal and legal migration. That is one of their key campaigning tools.
It certainly is, and Nigel Farage said it himself. It was the issue that was perhaps at the forefront of the minds of the kind of voters that really do decide the elections, particularly in areas like the Red Wall that we've been speaking about so much. And he was saying, of course, that the Conservative Party doesn't talk about legal migration. And we heard more from Richard Tice a little bit later, tying that into other issues faced by the country, particularly issues like housing, tying in that demand side to, of course, the supply side that we do hear about so much too. So yes, the Reform Party standing on a clear manifesto there of wanting to bring down legal migration as well as eliminate illegal migration. And Richard Tice mentioned this old party favourite policy, the policy that a decade ago was enacted by Tony Abbott in Australia of turning back boats. It's his contention, it's his claim that that is legal under international law. Of course, what the government says is that that is not legal under international law and would cause a lot of problems with France, whom the boats would be turned back to. So clearly there's a lot to be debated there, but I suppose the other key issue that sets the Reform Party apart from the others is their stance on the ECHR. A clear manifesto commitment from this party today to leave the ECHR in the hope, in their view, of fixing the illegal immigration issue altogether.
And Tom, just very quickly before I let you go, a lot of support in my inbox for Reform UK, for Richard Tice, for Farage, but also a lot of people writing in to say that a vote for reform is a vote for the Labour Party.
Well, it's interesting. That's something that Nigel Farage hinted at in his speech. But his answer to that charge, and it's a charge that is thrown quite regularly at the Reform Party, aren't you throwing away your vote? What Nigel said to that was, what would be the difference between 5 years of the Labour Party and 5 years of the Conservative Party? He said that perhaps the Labour Party would have lots of boats arriving on our southern coasts. Perhaps the Labour Party would see tax at a 71-year high, but then pointed out that that's exactly what's happened in the last few years under the Conservative Party too. I suppose the counter-argument to that, what the Conservatives would say to that charge, is that there has been a definite change in Conservative Party policy in the last few months or so. You only have to look at Rishi Sunak's new policy towards net zero, his more strident language when it comes to culture war issues as well. And clearly this intention of Rishi Sunak presenting himself as a change candidate, that theme of his speech on Wednesday. So there are two very clear arguments there. Number one, people in Reform saying, what's the difference between the Tories and the Labour Party? Give us a go. But clearly the Conservative Party trying to differentiate itself in the same breath, saying, no, we are a different party from the Labour Party. There is clear blue water there. So that is a debate that will no doubt run and run.
Yes, I'm sure. Now, I know you have to head off to Liverpool, no rest for the wicked. You're off to the Labour Party conference later today, so I'll let you catch your train. That's GB News Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood bringing us the very latest from the Reform Party conference. Please do keep your views coming in on those speeches, Farage, Tice, and what you make. Do Reform UK have a chance of increasing their share of the vote? They're sat at about 7 to 10% at the moment. Can they gain more? What do you think? Now, moving to our top story of the day, Russia and the UN has called for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Palestinians as Islamist group Hamas launched its biggest attack on Israel in years. Ukrainian President Zelensky has called it a terrorist attack. At least 40 Israelis have been killed, with more than 700 Israelis injured. Now, here's live pictures coming from Gaza that you can see there on the screen. I'm going to talk to Jake Wallace-Simons, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, there's rockets being fired right now, as I understand, in my ear. Jake, thank you very much for joining us. You're from the Jewish Chronicle. Do you have any friends and family who are out there, and what are you hearing from the ground, if indeed you are?
Well, I know, like many Jewish people, I know a lot of people who are out there at the moment as Israel attack. This is a war. This is an open. Benjamin Netanyahu has declared, and we can expect a major response over the next day and probably over the next in response to this. Sorry.
Jake, I think we're losing you on the line. I'll see if we can reconnect you. Are you there? Can we speak to you?
I'm here. I'm
you're
yes.
here. OK, I think we lost a bit of sound there. Do you mind repeating what you said?
Yes, I mean, this is the biggest assault on Israeli territory that we've definitely been in my lifetime. It came on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War of 1973, when, similarly, as a result of a huge intelligence failure, Israel was taken by surprise. Fast forward to today, and the Gaza border was entirely overrun by Palestinian terrorists led by Hamas. It seems like the Israeli forces lost control of the Erez border crossing, allowing militants to come into Israel, and they proceeded to carry out some horrendous massacres and kidnaps. We've seen pictures of them entering bomb shelters where families were huddling and gunning them down in cold blood. We've seen them dragging women, children, mothers and babies, and unarmed civilian men into jeeps across the Gaza border and parading them in the street. We've seen them mutilating corpses to the jubilation of crowds. So this is a major, major attack. To call it a terror attack is insufficient. It's an act of war. These are well-trained Hamas infantrymen who are operating inside the Jewish state on Israeli soil, and the response is going to be huge. The real questions are now, what will happen next? Will Hezbollah get involved from the north? They have 150,000 missiles pointing at Israel. That's more of an arsenal than most nation states have. Will they unleash that? Will the Israeli Arabs rise up in support of Hamas? That's another question as well. And behind it all, how close is Iran to a nuclear weapon? There's no doubt that Iran is pulling the strings here.
Yes, and you echoed what Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, said. He said, we are at war and we will win, as he sought to reassure Israelis that they will do as much as they can to prevent this from escalating. So what do you make of the international response? We've heard very clearly from the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and also the leader of the opposition that Israel has every right to defend itself and there is solidarity there. Jake, I think we may have lost Jake there, but these pictures. Jake, are you there? We've got some pictures here live from Gaza. We're just working on getting Jake back there. As we've seen, the very latest news is that sadly 40 Israelis have been killed. Many more hundreds are injured. We've seen many footage circulating online and elsewhere of people being handled and dragged through the streets by Hamas militants. We're receiving many reports to that effect. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said, we are at war and we will win. Mohammed Dayef, who is the military commander of the Islamist movement, announced the state of the operation on Hamas media. He called on Palestinians everywhere to fight. He said this is the day of the greatest battle to end the last occupation on earth. Again, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel said we are at war and we will win. We've also heard from the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He said we stand in solidarity and Israel has a right to defend itself. We also heard from the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, who said something to the same effect. This is on Twitter that we've heard from both the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and also the leader of the opposition. Now, it's Shabbat today. It's Saturday morning. This broke out at 7:30 a.m. We spoke to someone earlier, a journalist in Israel. Siren went off at 7:30 in the morning. She went to take shelter and has been there since. Hamas have been firing rockets. Huge explosions on screen that you can see there live from Gaza as Hamas, the militant Islamist group, attacks Israel. You can see there at least 40 Israelis have been killed, more than 700 injured in the Hamas attack, and this has only been for a few hours. We know that this is the biggest attack on Israel in years this morning. Some are calling it unprecedented, infiltrated areas of southern Israel. We know at least 40 Israelis have been killed. We'll bring you the very latest as we get it. We also know that Hamas have launched multiple and combined land, sea and air attacks inside Israel proper. They've been under sustained rocket fire. Jake is back, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, I think we were talking when your line broke up there about the international response, the strong response from the Prime Minister here and the leader of the opposition.
That's right. I mean, there can be no equivocating when it comes to this kind of attack. It is brutal. It's been of a piece, really, with the sort of anti-Semitic pogroms that we've seen throughout history in Russia, in Poland, in Iraq and elsewhere, whereby marauding gangs of terrorists have been prowling the streets, shooting any civilians that they can, taking prisoners, mutilating bodies, and generally committing acts of brutality that contravene all the norms of the civilized world. So the condemnation has been strong. Israel has to defend itself. It's vital Israel now reinstates whatever deterrent it can against such attacks. There's been a huge intelligence failure that led to this debacle occurring, and other enemies that Israel has on other borders, notably Hezbollah in the north, are going to be looking on with interest and wondering whether they will join the fray. So this is a very, very fragile and dangerous moment for Israel and the wider Middle East.
You talk about the wider Middle East. I wonder if you've given any thought to how this may play out in this country, if indeed at all, whether we'll see protests. We often see when there are conflicts abroad, internationally, that they can play out in minority communities in this country. Is that a concern?
It's a huge concern. I mean, last time there was a conflict between Israel and Gaza in 2021, 256 Palestinians killed. That was enough to bring 180,000 protesters onto the street in Hyde Park. We saw gangs driving through Jewish areas of North London with megaphones shouting about how they were going to rape Jewish children. We saw gangs rolling through High Street, Kensington, through the streets there, shouting how they wanted to find the Zionists, they wanted their blood. So, at the moment, it's very clear to reasonable people in the world, this was an unprovoked attack en masse by a very well-trained and well-prepared terrorist group that has no discrimination between killing soldiers and civilians, men, women, or children, and is committing acts of the most grotesque brutality that we have seen in recent times. Israel must defend itself. It must take action. But we do know that there's a great swathe of the public who are informed by what I call Israelophobia, which will respond to any effort from the Jewish state to defend itself with huge condemnation and demonstrations, regardless of how many precautions the Jewish state takes to preserve life in its military operations. So this is only going to go in a bad run, both in Israel, in the theatre of war, and I fear elsewhere, including in Britain.
Now, Jake, our viewers are currently watching on the screen, and this is for the benefit of our radio listeners. We are looking live at Gaza, and there are what appears to be explosions, huge clouds of smoke over buildings. Many look as though they are residential buildings there, residential homes. There'll be many people who are sheltering right now and potentially fearful for their lives.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure how at this distance you can tell the difference between residential homes and other buildings, but yes, Israel is responding to these brutal attacks, this invasion of its sovereign territory by taking military action, as any other country would do. I mean, you cannot stand by and see your civilian population targeted in this way by terrorists and not respond. So this is a state of war, and a state of war is different from a counterinsurgency operation. State of war means that the Gaza Strip will be sealed off. It will not have energy supplies. It probably won't have food or water supplies while the operations are ongoing. Not just terrorist bases will be attacked, but also the Hamas infrastructure, including buildings and communication and bridges and things like that. So this is a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. Loss of life is going to be huge, and all we can do is pray.
Now, Jake, I must ask, there will be those who draw an equivalence between the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu's Israeli government and those of groups like Hamas that we're seeing. What do you say to those people?
Well, I don't think anybody who has a reasonable moral compass will draw such an equivalence. I think it's only people who are infused with the newest version of the oldest hatred of anti-Semitism, which now targets the state of Israel rather than Jews as a race. There quite clearly is no equivalence between the two sides. Of course, in any modern warfare, civilians are sadly killed, and that's the case with Israel's wars as well as Britain's and America's. But Israel does not target civilians. On the other hand, we've seen such brutality from Hamas operatives, not just targeting civilians, women and children, but dragging their bodies away and mutilating them in public, parading them through the streets while crowds cheer and applaud and sweets are handed out in Palestinian population centers across the West Bank and in Gaza. This is an entirely different order of brutality. Of course, you know, a dead person is a dead person, and I don't mean to downplay that in the slightest, but I think that we do need to recognize that any such drawing such equivalence is abhorrent and wrong.
Now, Jake, I really appreciate your time. You mentioned earlier about the intelligence failure. Israel is known around the world for having one of the best, if not the best, intelligence service, access to intelligence and also defence. This must be a worry for those living in Israel, concerned that this could have gone unchecked, unnoticed.
This is a huge shock. It's a huge shock. And it happened on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War in 1973, when an intelligence failure led to Israel being caught by surprise, invaded both from the north and from the south. 50 years on, everyone assumed that those lessons had been learned, that Israel was no longer vulnerable to such surprise attacks. Israel, as you've said, is known to have the most sophisticated intelligence operation and the most powerful military in the region. The idea that it's being caught unawares in this way is almost unthinkable to anybody living in Israel and any commentators and analysts overseas. And yet it has happened. In 1973, the reason was that there was a sort of group in the military and amongst politicians whereby they thought that because the Arabs would likely lose the war, they wouldn't dare to wage one. It remains to be seen as to whether that was the case today, whether there was some kind of hubris that led to this woeful failure. But right now, the important thing is to defend Israeli civilians marauding terrorists.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you for that extended interview. Jake Wallace, Simon's editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Now in the studio with me is Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio, Peter. Of course, this is a big talking point within the Labour Party. We see every conference. There are discussions about Israel, Palestine. Are you pleased that, and will most Labour Party members be pleased with Keir Starmer's swift response statement on what is happening? He has said in a tweet that he stands behind Israel's right to defend itself.
Well, first of all our thoughts are with the victims of this despicable attack. It's a very wicked act and utter
or maybe more than 40 people killed. So I think all our thoughts with them today. As I understand it, Keir Starmer's very quickly come out and said there's no justification. I think that's absolutely correct. What we're witnessing is barbarism on ordinary Israeli people going about their life. But clearly this will come up in Westminster, and it will come up at all the party conferences, including Labour this weekend. And I hope the membership, as I do, support Keir Starmer's stance, which is very clear.
What do you think if there are... it's very difficult because at the Labour Party conference there will be people who belong to the hard left of the party, and they may have very negative views towards the Israeli state, towards the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and actions there. How will Keir Starmer manage this?
Well, with sensitivity and by listening. You know, I think much of the Labour Party, and not to be party political, much of politics and society wants to see peace in the Middle East and wants to see a two-state solution, and will be horrified by the events of today. It's possible on the way conference actually works, there'll be what's called, urgent or emergency motions, so the Labour Party can express its solidarity. But I think, obviously, clearly you're alluding to the disastrous time Labour had 5 or 6 years ago over anti-Semitism. I think Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party. That is a process that continues, and we can't be complacent about it. But I think when details are still emerging, I think most folks' reaction at conference will be the same as mine, which is horror at what's unfolding and great empathy for those who've lost their lives and been left bereaved or injured by these wicked events.
Yes, we've got more explosions on the screen there in Gaza, live from Gaza, our video feed there. It's worth noting, Jeremy Corbyn, you mentioned the Corbyn years. He has tweeted an hour ago, he said the unfolding events in Israel and Palestine are deeply alarming. We need an immediate ceasefire, an urgent de-escalation, and we need a route out of this tragic cycle of violence. Ending the occupation is the only means of achieving a just and lasting peace. And that's the controversial element of that tweet, that last sentence, ending the occupation, is what he said there. Well, the last thing that Keir Starmer wants is for this issue to take over the conference. But sadly, that's all we've got time for. Peter Edwards, thank you very much indeed for your time. Former editor of Labour List. Looking to the Labour response to what is happening in Israel, Keir Starmer has come out very strongly to condemn what has happened, the attack by Hamas, the militant group, and to defend Israel's right to defend itself. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday. I am Emily Carver. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel. Stay with us.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. Here are the headlines at 2:34. At least 40 people have been killed and hundreds more injured after the Hamas militant group launched a surprise attack on Israel. Thousands of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip while gunmen crossed the border in a deadly assault. This video shows Palestinians using a bulldozer to break through a fence separating Gaza with southern Israel as gunshots are heard in the distance. Local news has reported civilians in border towns barricading themselves in their homes, pleading for help. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said terrorists have infiltrated the country.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the State of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I convened the heads of security and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists.
In a sign of regional tensions, Iraq's government has said via a statement that today's attack is the outcome of what it called decades of oppression by a Zionist occupation. Well, earlier I spoke to Con Coughlin, the defence editor at the Daily Telegraph, who says Israel was caught by surprise.
The fact that the Palestinian militants seem to have taken some Israelis hostage, the Israeli media is reporting that 35 Israelis have been taken hostage. I mean, this is an enormous security failure by the Israeli Defence Forces, and I think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will be determined to respond very strongly against this, and I think you can expect to see a lot of Israeli military activity targeting Hamas strongholds in the Gaza Strip.
The Labour Party has unveiled new plans to clamp down on sexual harassment in the workplace. Speaking at the Labour Party Women's Conference in Liverpool, Deputy Leader Angela Rayner says the party has plans to break the class ceiling and the glass ceiling. It comes as new figures show almost 5 million women experience sexual harassment at work each year.
The Labour government will amend the Equalities Act to introduce a legal duty for employers to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. But that's not all. We will make misogyny a hate crime.
Well, those are the headlines, and you can get more on those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, it's over to Emily.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Emily Carver. I'm on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, the Labour Party is calling for a major overhaul of the NHS. They're warning it must modernise or die. It comes as the party aims to double the number of diagnostic scanners in hospitals, offering quicker access to life-saving treatments, they say, for tens of thousands of patients. Wes Streeting, who's the Shadow Health Secretary, stressed the NHS is facing an existential crisis. But will we see a revitalised NHS under a Labour government? It's also worth noting that Wes Streeting, in the report on this, he's said that this is going to be paid for by scrapping non-dom status, which, if I remember rightly, has been used quite a lot to fund a lot of different things, not least nurses and doctor pay rises. Anyway, joining me now is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Nigel, I thought you were going to be up in Liverpool already for the Labour conference, but thank you for joining me from, I believe, Kent, am I right? Yes, in your library there. Thank you for joining me. So Wes Streeting coming out of the blocks talking about the NHS. This is what's going to be announced at the conference. I suspect more money for diagnostics, more money for better equipment, a modernisation of the NHS. This is music to many people's ears. He's going to pay for it by scrapping non-dom status. When have I heard that before?
Yes, he is. And at the moment, the spending plans that Labour have are not too ambitious. So if abolishing non-dom tax status raises the 2.3 billion that it's predicted to, so far Wes Streeting has only spent 171 million of that, which is not very much. And that's what he's doing with doubling the number of scanners that hospitals have got. The problem is that when it comes to MRI and CT scanners, they only last for have a shelf life of around 10 years. Half of them now have passed that 10-year mark, and 1 in 5 hospitals are still using machines that were around when the last Labour government was in power. So it's urgent to do, but when it comes to adding up the costs of it, it is not huge compared with the kind of money that non-dom tax status abolition is expected to raise.
Now, a lot of people, when they see Wes Streeting says the NHS must modernise or die, they don't think a few more scanners is what he's talking about or what he should be talking about. A lot of people will have seen that and thought, goodness me, is NHS reform, root and branch reform on the cards? It seems he's sort of moving away from that bold stance that he did have only months ago.
No, I think that root and branch reform is on the cards. That's exactly what it needs. And this is the point about the money side of it. It's not just about throwing more and more billions of pounds at the NHS. It's about actually changing how it operates. So one of the things that Wes Streeting is keen on, and something the Tories have actually been copying, is to cut the huge waiting list at the moment, that you'll be able to have your operation in a private hospital, but at the same cost it would be to the NHS. So you could get hundreds of thousands of more people through the system quicker by using both the private and public sector. So that's one of the sort of reforms he's talking about, and that's not something that will cost a huge amount of money.
Now, that will send alarm bells ringing for some people on the left of the Labour Party who are concerned about any use of private services, because they might see that as, you know, the back way to full privatisation of the NHS. And of course, Tony Blair was previously criticised for allowing private operators.
Yes, I mean, the Tony Blair system of private financial didn't really work. So it's not about going down that route. And it's not about actually privatising the NHS. It's about using all the capacity that exists in the country to treat patients. When you've got 7.7 million people on waiting lists, it really is urgent to try and get those lists down. So all it means is it's unused capacity in private hospitals will be used for NHS patients.
Now, Nigel, we've been seeing horrific footage from Gaza, from Israel, this massive attack from Hamas in that country. 40 people confirmed dead already, really shocking stuff, hundreds injured. We know there's an ongoing debate within the Labour Party about Israel-Palestine, about all the issues relating to that. Could it be that this maybe dominates more than Keir Starmer certainly would like?
Well, we'll have to see how events develop in Israel. And I think that it's significant. You read out the Keir Starmer put out immediately after news of these attacks came through, and he is saying that the Labour Party and a future Labour government will be foursquare behind Israel in their struggle with Hamas. Yes, you're right. There will be the left of the party who still have plenty of sympathy with Palestine, and obviously, ultimately, you need a two-state solution in the Middle East if we're ever going to solve this problem. But that seems to be as far away as it ever was.
Yes, because I remember in the Corbyn era there were Palestinian flags aplenty in the conference hall. Keir Starmer will certainly not want this to deflect or distract from what he has to say to the conference hall. In terms of what we can expect generally from the Labour conference, we saw that Rishi Sunak got a tiny bump in his personal approval ratings following the Tory conference, but they didn't make any progress when it came to the overriding voting polling for the election itself. Do you think Keir Starmer, what has he got to do?
Well, I mean, I think that we've got to the point now where Labour will actually flush out a policy, so at last we're going to see exactly what a Labour government is likely to look like. I think that Keir Starmer has proved that he's competent. He's proved he's got the confidence of the voters. We've seen that in opinion polls and obviously in the Scottish by-election as well. Now what he's got to show is that he's also radical and prepared to change Britain for the better. And that's what I think you'll see in his conference speech on Tuesday.
Yes, it'll be very interesting to see what is said. We've seen Angela Rayner talking about making misogyny a hate crime. Is that a priority for the British people? I'm not so sure, but she has many other things to say. And of course, I look forward to hearing what Keir Starmer has to say for the future of this country, what he's going to do better. He has so far been vague, but we are seeing more policies come, are we not? Thank you very much, Nigel Nelson there, our senior political commentator at GB News, live from Kent. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Emily Carver. We've got lots more coming up, so stay tuned. You are, of course, watching and listening to GB News Saturday on GB News, Britain's news channel. Stay tuned. Sorry, I got a bit tired there.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, yesterday, the Labour Party won the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election as a 20% swing saw Michael Shanks take the seat from the SNP. The Scottish seat was vacated when Margaret Ferrier was suspended from the House of Commons for breaching COVID rules. That led to a recall petition. Commenting after the announcement, Keir Starmer said, "The people in Rutherglen and Hamilton West have sent a clear message. It is time for change," he said. There he is. Now, joining me now is pollster and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, Sir John Curtis. Thank you very much for your time, Sir John. A huge result for Labour.
Yes, a much better result indeed for Labour than we even anticipated from the opinion polls. It was no surprise that Labour won Rutherglen. They had, after all, won the seat in the 2017 general election under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And the swing required for Labour to pick up the seat at 5% was well below the 11% swing being registered by the opinion polls in Scotland. But in the event, it was a 20-point swing. And indeed, in some respects, it was a result that seemed to point to the politics of Scotland before the 2014 independence referendum, when Labour used to be dominant, as opposed to the post-referendum politics we've been experiencing for the last decade of the SNP being the masters of the political scene. So, for example, Labour's share of the vote at 59% was only a little bit below the 61% that the party won in Rutherglen back in 2010 before the referendum. And it's a big if, and it's only a hypothetical exercise, but if you take the swings that occurred in Rutherglen and assume they would happen across Scotland as a whole, then Labour will be back to the 41 seats that they had in 2010. So to that extent, at least, a very clear indication that the Labour Party are now posing to the SNP the biggest challenge since the referendum.
And Sir John, many unionists will be delighted by the prospect of the SNP doing badly in Scotland. Do you think this reflects a party that's on its way out, or is that wishful thinking from those people?
Well, I think certainly one thing you need to be aware of is that the decline in support for the SNP is a decline in support for the SNP, not a decline in support for independence. You take the half dozen or so polls that have been conducted in the last 2 months, support for independence is averaging 59%, much where it has been for much of the last couple of years. In other words, therefore, we probably have to look to the problems facing the SNP as a party for an explanation. And I would certainly pick out two. One is that Mr. Yusuf, their new leader, is relatively unpopular, nothing like as charismatic, or in many people's views, as effective as his predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon. And the second is that the leadership contest earlier this year did help to expose some of the internal divisions inside the SNP, rural issues, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, voters tend not to like divided parties. So in a sense, therefore, this is the SNP trying to accommodate itself to the more difficult Sturgeon environment, which it now finds itself.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. So John Curtis there, eminent pollster and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, one of the best pollsters and political analysts out there, really. But that's it from me today. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. We went live to the Reform Party conference. We, of course, talked about what's happening in Israel, shocking footage coming from there of the attack by Hamas. But with me now is Nana, who is going to be with you for the next couple of hours. What have you got on your plate?
Well, of course, we're going to be talking about what's going on in Israel. We are going to be going live to Uri Geller. He is there. He's got a museum in Israel. He's going to talk us through exactly what's been happening on the ground, because he's there. He knows all about what's happening with regards to politics, which is terrible, very tragic and an awful situation. So we'll be looking at that. We'll also have Belinda DeLucy in the house. She'll be talking a little bit about reform, but she's going to be my new panellist just for the afternoon. Basically, all the stuff that's going on, as we can see in the headlines right now. So Keir Starmer, of course, the fact that they won a seat in Scotland. Could it be now that actually the dream of independence is dead?
Well, we heard from Paul Curtis there talking to us about that. The SNP maybe, independence he's not so sure about, but it'd be interesting to see what your panellists and experts have to say about that one. A lot of people would be delighted at the prospect, but we know independence is a very, very strong movement, and it's not only linked to the Scottish Nationalist Party. But thank you very much indeed for watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Emily Carver. Thank you for joining, but don't go anywhere. It is Nana next. But before that, it is the weather with Jonathan.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. There is the continued risk of flooding and travel disruption across Scotland throughout the rest of today and into tomorrow, with the stored